All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to get into something really thought-provoking, a situation that really makes you stop and think. It all went down in Brits, South Africa, at a mosque, and yeah, there's a firearm involved. A whole bunch of public reaction, a lot of outcry.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I've got news reports to look at, social media threads, some firsthand accounts. So we'll explore the incident itself, the discussions that it sparked, and what it all says about gun laws in South Africa.
What's especially interesting about this case is how it raises these questions of justification. When it comes to personal disputes, the use of firearms, it really kind of illuminates these legal gray areas and also just societal attitudes towards violence.
Right, so let's start with the basics. What exactly happened at the Brits Jamiah Mosque on March 2nd?
Well, we know that a man named Azharuddin Bahayat entered the mosque carrying an assault rifle. And, just to be clear, an assault rifle is a type of firearm specifically designed for rapid fire, typically used by military forces, so you can imagine the level of alarm this caused.
Yeah.
Now, his target was a teacher at the mosque's madrasa. Now, madrasa is the attached school, and this teacher had allegedly slapped Payat's son.
So a slap leading to an armed confrontation at a mosque seems like a bit of an overreaction.
It certainly raises questions about proportionality and an appropriate response to conflict, and it actually gets even more unsettling.
Okay.
According to the Lydium Sun, which is a local news outlet, Payat also had a gas tank with him and threatened to burn the entire mosque down if this teacher didn't come out.
Wait, hold on. A gas tank and threatening arson. This is way beyond a personal dispute now. This is a threat to the entire community.
Absolutely. This detail definitely elevates the severity of the situation and really suggests a level of premeditation and also this potential for much wider harm.
So what happened next? Did this lead to any violence at the mosque?
Thankfully, no.
Okay.
It didn't. But later that day, things took another turn. Payat reportedly found the teacher, actually a Maulana, at his home. Maulana is a title for an Islamic scholar, quite a respected title, and physically assaulted him.
Okay, so even though he didn't, use violence at the mosque, he still assaulted the Maulana later on.
Right. So this brings us to the legal part of this. So Payat was arrested, and he's now facing charges of illegal possession of a firearm, pointing a firearm, and assault. However, and this is where it gets really interesting, there don't seem to be any charges related to his initial actions at the mosque.
He brought an assault rifle to a mosque and threatened to burn it down, and there are no charges. How is that possible?
Well, this is kind of the point of our deep dive today, right? So it seems that the charges are specifically related to the assault of the Maulana and the unlawful possession and the use of that firearm, brandishing it. It's possible that authorities just couldn't find enough evidence to support charges related to the threats at the mosque. Or perhaps, maybe the victims, the mosque leadership, the teacher himself chose not to press charges. It's not entirely clear.
It's so interesting, On the one hand, we have these very serious charges, but then on the other hand, these actions at the mosque, which are so dangerous and threatening, are not being prosecuted.
Yeah.
It's a strange legal situation.
It really is. And it gets even more complicated when you consider how the public reacted to all of this, Social media, as you might expect, it went crazy.
I can imagine. I bet people were very upset.
There was a lot of anger, a lot of disbelief, but there was also a lot of attempts at humor, even justifications for what Bayat did. It's fascinating because it gives us a look into how people view violence and rationalize it, especially when it comes to protecting your own.
What were people actually saying, though?
Yeah.
What kind of comments were they making?
Well, some were just kind of flippant, like, when the fast gets to you, maybe referencing Ramadan, which is a time of fasting for Muslims. Others were very quick to judge, things like, with a father like that, the son definitely deserved the slap, without having any context, right?
To judge a child based on their parents' actions, that seems unfair.
Yeah. Then you have those eye for an eye type of comments, like, if someone slaps your son, you slap them back, which just perpetuates the cycle of violence.
So there were people minimizing it, making assumptions, even advocating for retaliation. It definitely struck a nerve, brought up some societal attitudes about violence and conflict resolution.
Definitely. And then amid all of that, you have these voices of reason. People calling for responsible gun ownership, condemning what Payat did. One comment that stood out said, "Everyone is someone with a gun. Take it away and see who they really are."
That's a very powerful statement. It really makes you think about the responsibility that comes with owning a firearm. And speaking of responsibility, let's talk about South Africa's gun laws. I know that South Africa has pretty strict gun laws, right?
They do. South Africa does have relatively strict gun control laws compared to other countries. But to really understand all of the complexities of what happened in this case, we need to dig a little deeper into the specifics. And I think that's where we should pick up in part 2 of this deep dive. So, before we went to that quick break, we were about to kind of unpack South Africa's gun laws. We were going to see how they play into this really unusual situation.
Right, because Payat was totally out of line. We've established that.
Yeah.
But what does the law actually say about, someone bringing a gun to a mosque, especially with these added threats?
Right. So, South Africa's laws, when it comes to firearm offenses, they're very, very serious. They take this very seriously. The Firearms Control Act of 2000, it lays out these really strict rules and regulations for owning, possessing, and using any kind of firearm.
So to legally own a gun in South Africa, what do you actually have to do?
Well, it's not easy, and that's the whole point. First, you have to be 21 years old, at least. You can't have any criminal record, no history of mental instability, things like that. And then there's this competency test, where you have to show that you know about firearm safety and the law, and then you have to have a valid reason for needing a firearm. Self-defense, maybe sports shooting, something like that. And then you have to go through background checks. And these are really thorough. They include interviews with family and friends, things like that.
It's way more strict than I thought. It sounds like they really vet these applicants.
They do. And even if you make it through all of that, there are still limitations on the types of guns you can own and how many. Permits are really specific. Each one's for a specific firearm and specific ammunition. So it's not like you just get a free pass to own whatever you want.
So the system itself is, in theory, pretty airtight.
In theory, yeah.
But we know that Payat had an unlicensed firearm, in addition to his other gun. So that kind of brings us back to those loopholes, right?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. That's the inconsistency here. Even with these regulations, he still had an unlicensed firearm. How did he get it? Was it through illegal channels? Did something slip through the cracks in the system? Are they not monitoring the stuff well enough? Investigators are going to have to figure that out.
Right, and it makes you wonder how many other unlicensed firearms are out there.
Exactly.
If someone like him can get through.
And that's the thing. It highlights how important it is to constantly evaluate and, improve these gun control measures. You can have laws on the books,
Yeah.
but they have to actually be enforced. They have to be adaptable, right? Because things change.
For sure.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the specific charges that he's facing. We've talked about illegal possession, pointing a firearm. Those are pretty straightforward. But what about, his actions at the mosque, the threats, the gas tank? Can he get in more trouble for that? Legally speaking?
It's kind of a gray area. So even though nobody's filed charges for that specific incident, that doesn't mean he's off the hook. It could still lead to some legal action, like, for instance, threatening to burn the mosque down. That could be seen as incitement to violence. It could even be categorized as a terrorism-related offense, depending on how the prosecution sees it, how they want to apply the law.
So even if, the people involved don't want to press charges, the state can still step in and basically say, hold on, this is unacceptable. You're a threat to public safety, and we're prosecuting you anyway.
Exactly. There are certain offenses, and this would be one of them, involving a firearm, a threat like that, where the state is going to step in. It doesn't matter if the victim wants to participate or not. They want to send a message, right? That this kind of behavior won't fly, no matter what the motivation is.
Yeah, that makes sense. So there's this balance, respecting what the victims want, but also understanding that sometimes things are so bad that they just need to be prosecuted for everyone's safety.
It's a very tricky thing. A lot of legal experts debate this all the time, so we'll have to wait and see what happens. How does the prosecution want to proceed with this? Are they going to add charges because of the mosque incident? We'll have to see.
And this whole thing just really makes you question how effective these gun laws actually are. Even with a country like South Africa that has these strict regulations, we still see cases like this.
Yeah.
Someone with a history of aggression can get a gun, and then they use it to threaten people. It's pretty discouraging.
It raises questions. You're right. What are the limits of gun control? But we also have to remember that, laws are just one piece of this. We have to think about the societal issues, too, the things that lead to this kind of violence and aggression. Things like poverty, inequality, people not having access to mental health services.
Yeah, it's definitely not a simple fix. It's this huge, complex problem that needs a lot of different approaches. But seeing someone walk into a mosque with an assault rifle, That's just, it's jarring.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel right.
Yeah, it really goes against what those places are supposed to be,
The
right?
places of worship are supposed to be safe. There's sanctuaries. When violence comes into that space, it breaks that feeling of security.
It does, and it can have a big impact on the community, psychologically, emotionally, it's a big deal. And, it shows us that we can't just assume things are going to be safe. Even in places like that, we have to stay aware, be prepared for anything. And I think it also shows how important it is for communities to talk to each other, to understand each other. If there was more open communication, maybe this wouldn't have happened, maybe there could have been a peaceful solution.
That's such a good point. So we've seen that South Africa's gun laws are strict, how they're applied, but then this still happened. What do you think needs to change?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's tough. There's no simple answer. Some
Yeah.
people want even stricter licensing, really thorough background checks. They want limits on the kinds of firearms that people can own. Others think we need to look at mental health, make sure people are getting the help they need. And then, of course, there's the whole illegal firearms trade that needs to be addressed. It's complicated. There's not one solution that's going to work for everyone.
So it sounds like it needs to be a lot of different things, right?
Yeah.
Strengthen the laws, make sure they're actually being enforced, deal with those bigger issues you were talking about, the poverty, all that.
Exactly. It's a huge challenge, but we have to try, right? We have to think about it from all these different angles.
We do. At the end of the day, it's all about keeping people safe.
And that's on all of us, really. We all have a responsibility to think about gun ownership. What does it really mean? We have to support policies that make sense, and we have to challenge those attitudes, those behaviors that just create more violence.
Yeah, you're right. We all have a role to play. And this has been quite a deep dive. This case is complicated. It really has. But before we go, I think we should talk about that idea of justification, or at least how Bayat maybe thought he was justified.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in all the legal stuff, the arguments, but, at the end of the day, this is about a man who thought it was okay to bring a gun to a mosque because he thought someone did something wrong to his son.
Yeah, and that's a big problem, right? No matter what happened with the slap, we still don't know everything about that. But to go to that extreme, to threaten people like that, it's just not okay.
It's a huge problem. It really crosses a line. And it makes you think, how do some people see this? Their right to take things into their own hands, especially with a gun.
Yeah, it's like they think they're vigilantes or something. Like they can decide what justice is and just do it themselves. They don't care about the law or anyone else's safety.
That's a good way to put it. And, this case really shows us that we need other ways to solve conflicts, not violence. We need to talk to each other, understand the law, and let the system work the way it's supposed to.
Because even if Payat thought he was doing what was best for his son, he scared a lot of people and he made people distrust each other.
Exactly. And no matter what happens with this case in court, we should all learn from this. How do we deal with conflict? What are the dangers of violence? And why is it so important to follow the law?
This has been a really interesting deep dive. This isn't just about one guy. It's about so much more, bigger issues. We've talked about the law, about society, about guns and safety. It's all connected.